Hello everyone, Jules here. Today I'd like to talk about a topic that has been suggested by my friend Brad at Savage Tarot, and that is the topic of the Astral Plane and the Astral Journey. So I want to talk about different aspects about this today. I know a lot of people may think about the Astral Plane and they may immediately think about astral travel. So I'm going to talk about that as well, but I want to talk about all the different aspects about the astral plane itself and the astral journey, and I want to talk about this from different approaches. So I've written my notes here, and I'll have to read my own handwriting, which is always a bit of a problem, but I usually get through. So to begin, the astral plane. Sometimes the astral plane is described as a different dimension. There are different spiritual groups, different spiritualities, especially people who follow an ascension path would probably look at this as a different dimension, like a fourth or fifth dimension, but I refer to this as the astral plane. And what this is really about is to do with contact with the astral plane. It's really the plane of spirit or entities, which can be positive or negative. I'd rather not use the word good or bad, but positive or negative entities. And the type of contact that can be made is to do with what's probably known as astral doors or portals. And there's different ways and different methods of doing that. But I suppose where I want to also begin is talk about this mainly as a night journey. So that when I'm talking about the night journey, I'm hoping the automatic thought with viewers might be about sleep, what we do every night as an automatic process. That is actually a night journey. That is actually contact with the astral plane, whether we are aware of that or not. So that means that we can actually contact or interact with the astral plane without even being aware of it. So we can automatically and naturally do that already. So I think what people may want to know more about is some other methods and how this also can get entwined and integrated with our life, with our everyday lives, and also as part of a spiritual path or magic. It's really just to do with being aware and knowing more about the astral plane. Now, when I'm talking about the astral plane, and I'm also talking about the astral journey, which is really kind of like the same as astral travel, what happens during sleep, which is a different form of consciousness? There is an esoteric idea that has been around probably since ancient times, that when we sleep, we leave our usual waking consciousness and we drift off within our minds into a different type of world, and some people call that the astral world, which is the same really as the astral plane. So what I want to talk about here is sort of saying that when we do that as a process of sleep, we don't think about it, and we're usually not too concerned unless we may have nightmares from time to time. But the esoteric idea is that when we sleep, we actually visit the astral world, but we don't entirely leave our body. We are still connected to our earthly physical body, and the idea is that we are connected with something that is called the silver cord, which means that we come back into our body upon waking, into waking consciousness, because of the silver cord. And of course the silver cord gets broken, theoretically broken, at the point of death, when the soul leaves the body. So I think that's a really important thing to think about first, that we are actually already doing this, but we're not aware of it, or we don't think about it in that way. Now, otherwise, there are different methods and ways to tap into the astral plane. And you need to talk about, or I need to talk about, the different levels of consciousness here. We have our waking consciousness. We have the subconscious, which is pretty much connected to dreams. That is really coming mostly from the subconscious. And then there is the unconscious, which can really only be accessed through hypnosis, and some people would probably think possibly through very deep shadow work. But to be honest, the only time it's really contacted would be mainly through hypnosis or very deep state of meditation. So just to give some examples here using tarot cards, I've got them all here. The card of the subconscious is really the moon card. This is representing the subconscious. So it's a lunar plane, energy plane. So it's very reflective with the water here. There's intuition and instinct at play with the two different dogs here. And it's a transitional state here too, following along this path between the two towers. So this represents the subconscious. Consciousness for me is really the sun card, and this is the joy of consciousness, which is really like a type of awakening and a realization. So true consciousness is being fully aware of our surroundings and environment, and fully aware of our being. So this represents consciousness. And the card that kind of represents the unconscious for me is kind of like two cards. One of them is the Devil card, because unconsciousness can be a place of limitation without being able to contact that or to gain enlightenment. So I see the Devil card, not in a necessarily an evil way, but it's just all these blocks and limitations that some people may be able to sense is possibly in their unconscious. And the other card that I think can represent the unconscious as well is the Hanged Man. And this is to do with the planet Neptune, the Golden Dawn associations. And the interesting thing about the period that we're living in now, we are living in a very, very important period in regard to consciousness, because of the planet Neptune being in its own sign of Pisces, which is the moon. So this is very much to do with the subconscious and the unconscious. So let's continue with some of my notes here. And I think the journeying for the astral plane, the astral journey, is represented, the journey itself to me is represented by the Fool card, because this is the card, the Fool card represents the journey of the soul. And anyone who decides to do astral travel, who intentionally decides to do astral travel, is stepping off the cliff or the precipice. You know, there is some risk involved with what they may experience. So I think the Fool card represents the astral journey itself. Just to go back to my notes a bit more here. Now the next thing about this that I'm going to show a couple of tarot cards is to talk about the guardian of the threshold. And the guardian of the threshold is that energetic being or entity that is met if you are intending to do astral travel. The guardian of the threshold can also be met in a deep state of meditation or lucid dreaming as well. So the guardian of the threshold cards I see as particularly the Hermit card. So the Hermit card is there as a guide. So guardian of the threshold is kind of like an interchangeable term with a spirit guide. And it's usually a protective type of guardian. Probably a kind of guardian to point out that you are entering a zone that you have not entered before, and do you wish to proceed. So that's really to do with the Hermit card, and I think that's what the lantern is about too, sort of showing the way, guiding the way. For some other people, the guardian of the threshold could also be the High Priestess, because the High Priestess is definitely a guardian type figure, and a guardian of the upper worlds. The astral plane is the next plane above the earthly plane. So for a lot of people, the High Priestess can be the guardian of the threshold as well. And I suppose the other thing to point out for people who are fearful of intentionally doing astral travel, the guardian of the threshold could possibly even be the devil. And what this is more about is fear. If you have any misgivings about doing astral travel, making that decision to do that, you may encounter a guardian, a type of guardian that is more to do with your fearful reaction or your fearful attitude about astral travel. So there are occasional people who may have a negative experience with that. So it's something to be mindful of, but I'm going to discuss some ways of avoiding the devil or certain types of angels, like for example the angel of death, where you have such a strong fear of doing astral travel that you could possibly encounter the angel of death, and then you see this as a very intensely fearful experience. But I'm going to talk a bit about how you could avoid that. But if your overall subconscious attitude about astral travel is still a type of wariness that's relatively strong, you need to be mindful of that. Otherwise, you may not maybe you should not make the decision to do actual astral travel. You could review that later on in your life. Now, methods of path working. Now, path working is quite closely related to the astral journey. So one example is Kabbalah, which for me is the ultimate path working method. There's also meditation, where you can meditate into a fairly deep state. But of course you need to practice meditation, and you need to have quite a bit of experience of meditation. You know, you're not going to have that experience soon after beginning to learn meditation. You need to have a fairly solid practice underway before you could use that to interface with the astral plane. Now, one thing I want to mention now is when I mentioned the devil card, if it was a strongly negative guardian of the threshold, psychic hygiene or psychic protection is a really good idea. And I'm going to mention some books at the end of this video that talk about that type of thing. So psychic protection, I'm not talking about having to, raise a circle or a cone of power or anything like that. I'm not talking about ceremonial magic here. I'm talking about the basics of psychic hygiene and psychic protection. So no, there does not need to be a circle. You don't have to create a circle for astral travel. I mean, you can if you like, but it's then you're getting into ritual. I mean, you can do it that way if you like, but that's not how I think of astral travel. Now, just talk a little bit more about the astral plane and the different components of that as well. The ancient Egyptians. So this is how old this is. The ancient Egyptians knew of different levels of the soul for example, and they knew all about the soul journey, including the afterlife. So this is really all about the astral plane. But this is how old these ideas and concepts are. And the time period that we're living in now is really interesting, because even the world of science, there is actually scientific research going on at the moment, researching meditation, the mind, and consciousness. And this is all to do with the astral plane and the many experiences, hundreds or thousands of experiences over time that people have had with interfacing with the astral plane. So I think the overall thing to keep in mind is the astral journey is about awakening of consciousness, ultimately. That's what it is. But it happens in stages. It might be the type of thing that has been called enlightenment, because enlightenment is not just like a spiritual wisdom or a spiritual knowing. It usually happens on a very experiential level. So the awakening of consciousness is really done in stages, and it's part of the ultimate astral journey, which I would say is life itself. You know, the soul entering the body at birth and then leaving the body at death. So now I want to talk about some books that I think are really good for looking at the astral plane and the astral journey and different methods. So the first one is, this is probably the best book of all, Soul Flight by Donald Tyson. Astral Projection and the Magical Universe. I think that is a perfect title. Now he calls it astral projection here. I don't really think of it as projection, but that's the title that, that's the concept that Donald Tyson has for this. So this is published by Llewellyn. It should still be in print, but you should, otherwise you'd be able to get this as a second-hand copy, or possibly on Skype, but I think a second-hand copy is the most likely one. So this is a great book. It's quite thick. And I'm just going to talk about, to begin with, some of the things that are in this book. I really, really like this book. So first of all, it's divided into part 1 and part 2. And part 1 talks about first of all, the definition of the astral plane. And he calls it the astral world. And then the little bit of history, just a really good background. Then it talks about the different methods and paths to access the astral world. So one of them really well known is shamanism. The path working of the Golden Dawn, which is Kabbalah, Hermetic Kabbalah. That's my method of choice. And the Fae portals, working with that liminal and subliminal worlds, those worlds of the Fae, the fairies. And then part 2 is practice and methods. So examples of astral doorways, tarot itself, which I think I do see. That's why I see tarot from a not only esoteric perspective, but I've always seen it from a fairly spiritual perspective, especially the major arcana. I see that as a suit of spirit. So the tarot cards, runes, you know, the god Odin was given the runes. That's the legend when he had hung from the tree, which is a very shamanistic legend. There's information on astral guides and astral protection, which is what I was talking about earlier. So there's lots of things in the book. Soul Flight by Donald Tyson. It's a really, really good book on the astral plane. So really worth getting. I think it's the only book that particularly focuses on that topic. I know there's other books about astral travel, but they're not done in this same wider approach. The next book is Spirit Allies by Christopher Penczak. Spirit Allies, meet your team on the other side. Meet your team from the other side. This is a really good practical book. It's got a lot of information in here, and I think it's a really good foundational book for the astral plane. I really do think it's a very practical book. This should still be in print. This is published by Weiser. It's an average size paperback book, but there's lots of information in here. So if I talk about what's in this book, Spirit Allies, it's divided into chapters. There is a chapter about the spirit realms, consciousness. So these things are not only topics in the book, but they're defined in clear ways. Methods of sensing, spirit allies and guides, and spirit animal totems, nature spirits, and there are exercises and diagrams in here, and the exercises are, and I think the information in general, but the exercises are all about what Christopher Penczak describes as developing the inner temple in order to contact the astral plane. So I think this is, you know, a really good book. Spirit Allies by Christopher Penczak. The next book, it's probably out of print, but you may be able to get this one as a second-hand book. It is Tarot Journeys by Yasmine Galenorn, and the subtitle is Adventures in Self-Transformation. There is a CD which comes with the book, but it's got guided meditations, but it's also for visualization. And these meditations are for each of the major arcana cards of the tarot. This is published by Llewellyn, but I'm fairly sure it's out of print. But if you can get a second-hand copy, it's good. Very good. And what I think this book is useful for is reading through the meditations. If you choose which card to work with as an astral doorway, you can then, if you don't want to use this for guided meditation, because you'd need to make a recording of that for meditation, or you can read through different paragraphs of each chapter, because each card has got the guided meditation journey. So you could read through the separate paragraphs that are there for each of the cards, and you may want to set that as an intention for dream work. I actually prefer that method. So I think that's a really good idea. So when I say dream work, I mean the dreaming process and what is encountered there, rather than looking for, I'm not talking about dream symbols or using the dreams as a type of oracle. These are not for like prophetic dreams. This is more for the experiential journey, and possibly writing some of it, if you wish, in a dream journal, but not to analyze the dream, not to analyze it, because if you are analyzing the dream, you are using the left side of the brain, and that's not what is used with the astral plane. It's more like intuition, and you are using the right side of the brain for that. It's all visual and imagery, and without analysis. It's a bit like the method of contemplation that I often talk about in regard to Kabbalah. So, Tarot Journeys by Yasmine Galenorn. So, it's a really good book, and I'll just double check if there's anything else I want to mention about this one. Oh, the other thing it does too, it also gives suggestions and thoughts for each of the major arcana cards at the end of the meditation information. And it also divides the major arcana into 3 different not life stages, but life encounters and life reflections. So it's really interesting for that as well. It's quite a unique book, and the introduction is quite worth looking at too. It's divided into four different parts or stages. Or you could just choose these. I mean, you don't have to do this in a sequential way. You could just choose which cards that you wanted to work with. So I'm hoping if people are interested in this one, they could get a second-hand copy of Tarot Journeys by Yasmine Galenorn. And the final book I want to show is, this is quite a unique book too, and it's probably still a second-hand, this would be a second-hand book. A Complete Guide to Night Magic by Cassandra Eason. And it's got a little subtitle, Nature's Most Powerful Force for Healing, Fulfillment and Happiness. This is a really practical book, and I love the association of the night. Excuse me. I love the association of the night with astral work and the astral plane. And there are night deities, and the astral travel information, or the kind of how-to, is in this one. But as I was saying, if you are not ready to do astral travel, there are lots of other ways to interface with the astral plane. I really like this book. It's just full of practical ideas, and it gives the astral plane this wider perspective with its association with the night and the moon. So this is a great book, and I think it's a really good one for people who want a practical book about the astral plane and astral travel, but this has got protection methods in here as well. So this is a really good book, very practical. It's just a paperback book size, and Cassandra Eason has written a lot of books on magic. And what I like about this book is that it is practical, and it does explain things without focusing too much on spells. I think a lot of people may look at this title and say, oh, that's just going to be spells. There's only a little bit of that in the book. I think it's a really practical book, all about the different aspects of night magic, not just from a spell perspective. So this is Complete Guide to Night Magic by Cassandra Eason. So I hope this has been helpful today, talking about the astral plane, and I'm quite glad that I got this suggestion, this request from Brad at Savage Tarot channel, because I've quite enjoyed talking about this today, and I wanted to talk about the astral plane in this wider perspective, so that people may think about this a bit more and may include this more in their path. I think a lot of people actually do interface with the astral plane without thinking about it or without knowing it. I mean, even the very obvious first example that I gave about the different stages of consciousness and sleep itself, you know, you're actually automatically doing this and you're not aware of it. But I think reflecting on this and thinking about this more as part of your spiritual path is actually quite important for the spiritual path, but also in connection with our levels of consciousness, especially if you think about how much of our behavior is automatic or subconscious, and how we could possibly make some of our behaviors or thoughts or habits more conscious in our lives. So I'll put the details below the video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.